Why so bloated? So with this, I didn't subscribe or like them again. Like I don't know why I don't subscribe to people. I'm noticing that, but IZEN, I think that's how you pronounce it. I actually watched some of his videos because he's really into like the meta of the game. So if you really want to know like what's happening with the meta, like I think his channel is like one of the best ones. And what he's talking about here is why so bloated. It's talking about like the Mythic plus and the I believe the like mechanics in it. I've only watched a little bit, and then I realized, oh, this is actually a different kind of video. It's not just about the meta. So I wanted to watch it on stream. Let's take a look. And he always like has these weird facts in the beginning.
Welcome, gentlemen and gentlewomen. Also, please carry along your gentle children as well. Today is January the 19th. We don't really have anything too interesting to point out that happened in history right now. So let's get on with the topic of the day.
Oh, that's funny. You know how he said that? Because most of his videos is just kind of weird. Like he brings up like historical facts that happened on that day. I don't know why, but I don't know. It was different. So
Topic of the day is what's been going on in Mythic Plus. No, it's not our usual weekly update on the meta of Mythic Plus. That's gonna come in a couple of days. For today, we have a question instead. The question of what's been going on in Mythic Plus dungeons.
yeah, I've only done 0 on like I think 2 of them, and even then, like I didn't really have a lot of fun.
Why do they feel so overly complicated? Why do the mobs all feel like they have 3 to 4 different abilities that you have to keep track of nowadays? Why have the dungeons been made so much more brimming with things, essentially, with stuff to keep track of? Basically,
Yeah,
this
that's what I've
is
been
something
hearing.
you very easily realize when you go and look at the dungeon's success chance as well as the amount of runs per dungeon. You're gonna be seeing things like these or things like these, telling you more or less the same thing. Shadow Moon, Burial Grounds, Court of Stars, and Temple of the Jade Serpent are amongst the easier ones, where
That's a pretty big drop off though. Like you got 88.8%, practically 90% for first place, and then third place is 62%. That's like a almost 30% difference, like 25% ish range. That's pretty bad.
whereas dungeons like Ruby Life Pools, like Azure Vault, and like Nokud Offensive are amongst the harder ones. The only 2 dungeons overlapping and changing the course of this trend are Halls of Valor, which is one of the older dungeons being a little bit harder, and Algetar Academy, which is one of the newer dungeons being a little bit easier. But beyond these, it's 3 out of 4. 3 out of 4 of the older dungeons seem to be all quite easy, and 3 out of 4 of the newer dungeons all seem to be quite hard. So I'm spotting a trend here, okay? I'm spotting some kind of direction that these dungeons are taking. And, you know, it's kind of understandable, because when you enter, okay, when you step foot into Nokud Offensive, you know you have to keep track of Shatter Soul, which is going to not only chunk your damage by 30%, but you also have to waste some time going to pick up back your soul. Also, it's difficult to find because there is a whole bunch of other particle effects and spells happening.
Yeah. I think that was one of my biggest problems is like I'll see videos of people doing Mythic Pluses and I'm just like, dude, there's just so much. Like I don't know. It seems like it's pushing towards like Lost Ark level of content. Like it's just a lot. And if you're in a group with people who don't really know what they're doing, like it just feels like it breeds a bit of a toxic culture. I'm not saying it is, but it wouldn't surprise me if it
Over
was.
the place, which makes it even harder to notice. Then you have to take track of the Deathbolt volley that you need to interrupt, the Deathbolt cast that you need to interrupt, the Harvest Soul, which is effectively an enrage effect of the mob whenever one of the players in your party dies, plus the chant of the...
That number looks... I don't know if that number is legit. Look at that. 395,000. 45%. That's crazy.
Dead, you need to get away from. The Grasp of the Dead, you need to get away from. You have the Rotting Wind of the Birds, the cone in front of you that you need.
Let's read some of these. Inflicts 44,000 shadow damage to all players within 10 yards. Increased damage done of all undead allies within 10 yards by 20%. And reduces their damage taken by 20%. Jeez. Reduces target player's movement speed by 50%. Inflicts 5 shadow damage. Yeah, I think some of these numbers are a bit weird. But let's assume this is like way more damage every second for 6 seconds. And then after 6 seconds, you get immobilized. Which I'm assuming if you're trying to dodge these things, like that's really not good. Then you have Rotting Wind, inflicts 55,000 shadow damage to enemies in front of the caster and reduces healing on them by 20%. That's pretty crazy. 10 seconds of that too.
To get away from the Mortar Strike on the tank that is going to eventually make
Ooh.
it harder and harder for you to keep your tank alive.
Yeah.
You know, this
Reduce
seems to
healing
be
by
a lot
30%.
of things you have to keep track of when you're doing this dungeon. But here's the kicker. This is not
It's also 20 yards, 1.5.
just in a dungeon. This is in a single pack of a single set of trash mobs, just 5 enemies. That is just the amount of abilities they are going to have.
Jesus.
Just the 5 of them. And that seems to be the problem nowadays. These dungeons seem to be over-designed. They seem to have way more things that you have to keep track of. Essentially, Blizzard went hard at work trying to find the best ways to create combos, to create some layups for the mobs, to find ways to one-shot you, or to still make your life a living hell. Abilities like Living Bomb, which do a lot of damage and they are unavoidable. They're just going to be cast on you and you have to deal with it. At the same time, though,
I wonder what the numbers are between Mythic 0 and Mythic like 15 plus. Like, I wonder how much of a drop off we're looking at.
Inferno is going to happen, which is also unavoidable. Those two can be quite dangerous together. You know what can make this even more dangerous? The fact that there are going to be mobs spam casting Cinderbolt. So now you have Inferno,
That's a lot of
and then
damage.
you have Cinderbolt, which can kill you in one hit. And then you also have Living Bomb with Cinderbolt, which can kill you in one hit. And if that's not enough, when you have Living Bomb and you're getting knocked up in the air, imagine if there are some mobs casting Flame Dance or casting Blaze of Glory and essentially carpet bombing the entire place with swirlies on the ground as you're getting knocked up.
Yeah, become unstoppable while in the fire, inflicting damage every 1 second to players within such and such yards, and launching a volley. Jeez, you do. That's basically 2 abilities in one, so it's 3 total. Strike the character for damage every 1 second, and then blast all players with flames, and inflict. Yeah, that's crazy.
By Living Bomb. That's also gonna one-shot you. There is a whole bunch of mechanics. There seems to be a whole bunch of mechanics and also multiples of them per each mob, sort of designed to be annoying. You know, sometimes back in the good old days, a dangerous mob had a cast, you interrupted the cast, the mob was now chill.
Or the dangerous mob gets slowed, and the tank kind of kites them.
Everything was cool. Nowadays, it's no longer like that. Nowadays, if Blizzard develops a mob which has a single dangerous ability you want to interrupt, they are going to develop something like the Conjured Lasher, the first plant trash mobs in Azure Vault. Yes, they only have one ability, but there is 3 of them per pack, and you're pulling 2 of them. And you're pulling 2 of these packs. Sometimes, if your group is a bunch of chads, they are pulling 3 packs of these, with 9 of them casting Mystic Vapors. It makes it much more challenging, you know, and the...
Yeah, need AoE, interrupt, AoE silence kind of things. Or CC, I guess.
Layups, the combos continue. You're pulling the Unstable Curator, which casts Forbidden Knowledge, you know, the whole spam of circles on the ground in the trash mob rings of Azure Vault, and at the same time you're gonna have Icy Bindings if it lets to be cast, If the cast goes through, you're going to be
Oh,
rooted. And then
take
you're
a decent
rooted
chunk.
with circles being spawned under your feet, and you get one shot and you die. While all of this is happening, the tank has to manage the big guys casting piercing shards, nearly one-shotting the tank if he's not a protection warrior, and most of the time also one-shotting the spazzing out demon hunter who just fell rushed in front of the tank and killed himself. And here I am complaining about Azure Vault, and I haven't even mentioned the Frog Gauntlet of Doom. Another example of the ways dungeons are developed nowadays. This is even a deceiving set of trash, because the frogs in here do nothing but jump around. The Tarasek Lashers in here do nothing other than applying a bleed to the tank, but then you have this guy. Then you have the one who casts Bestial Roar AoE to the entire party and then casts Shoulder Slam, which is also a knockback. You can get shoulder slammed, you can get knocked back into a frog jumping.
Yeah.
So essentially you get one shot. You can get...
Yeah, I was gonna say the damage is pretty high, so like if you get hit with that immediately, you get knocked into one of the frogs.
knocked back.
I don't see you surviving.
Two of these guys, you can get shoulder slam right at the same time as you're getting Bestial Roar. So you can get one shot that way as well. And just in general, there seem to be a whole lot of combos, a whole lot of ways for the trash mobs to just deal with you, essentially, rather than you dealing with them. This apparently and clearly does not seem to happen nearly as much when we look at older dungeons. Usually, older dungeons have one or two very dangerous abilities. Once you clear those abilities, you are fine, you are good to go. Most of those abilities feel fair. They feel like you had a role, you completed, you fulfilled your role, and now you get to continue. Like, for example, Fell Detonation. A whole bunch of damage, and you have to line of sight it. If you do, you're clear. Or, for example, the Embarrassment of Court of Stars. Back in the days, this was the doom of pugs. The imps. If you layer your crowd control correctly, the imps just die and you're good to go. Otherwise, you embarrass yourself and you all die at once. It felt back then, and it still feels right now, much more fair, so to speak, than the way the current dungeons, the modern dungeons of Dragonflight have been developed. It also feels like you have to put a lot of stress on players to keep track of things, especially in the world of pugs. In the world where you don't have voice communication, or you don't really go for voice comms, you have to do everything just randomly without knowing what your player next to you is going to do. So who is going to interrupt what, who is going to stun, who is going to knock up what and when. It makes it even harder in these new Dragonflight dungeons when you have so many things that you need to keep track of.
Yeah, like after like saying this, I'm just like, man, I was a bit interested in Mythic Plus. Like, not really, to be honest. Like, between Mythic Plus and doing the raid, I think I was more interested in the raid. But this just like makes me want to sit and wait and see what they do with Mythic Plus. See if it's going to continue on this track of just getting harder and harder and harder. In which case, I'm just not probably going to be interested in it. And not that I'm saying they shouldn't have things like that. I think the game should. But I don't think it should be for the trash mobs, because it's not like there's any reward for doing them.
That seems to be the main issue many players have had for now in this new season of Dragonflight. Not to mention, in case you want to look at the future to find some hopium, reminder that we still don't have in the pool of dungeons, and we will have in the pool of Mythic Plus dungeons next season, dungeons like Halls of Infusion and dungeons like Brackenhide Hollow, both of which were already touted to be the worst dungeons, and this was back during Mythic 0 days. So
yeah, especially Brackenhide Hollow, whatever it's called. Like, I actually really don't like that dungeon.
Imagine how nice they will feel once we get them into the Mythic Plus pool due to the overloadedness of abilities, mechanics, and things to keep track of those two dungeons. So, no, things won't change in Season 2, things will continue, and if anything, will actually get worse. We don't actually know which type of old dungeons we are gonna get in Season 2. Right now, we sort of lucked out. We got some pretty nice, pretty chill dungeons to deal with, especially Court of Stars and Shadow Moon Boiler Grounds were quite good. Yes, sure, we took the L with Oaths of Valor, but the rest of the dungeons were quite manageable. It's very likely that next season we are not going to get nearly as good of a set of older dungeons for the pool of Mythic Plus. So I guess in short, the question I wanted to give out to all of the viewers in here was, how have you felt the dungeons so far in this season? If you agree with this sentiment of constantly feeling like you're getting overwhelmed by mechanics, like you are no longer trying to do DPS when you're pulling a trash pack, you are now trying to survive when you're pulling a trash pack. If you did good DPS, that's a plus, okay? That's a bonus, a benefit, but the main important thing was that you managed to stay alive, to interrupt, stop, block as many mechanics as possible during that trash pack, which is a different feeling than what we had in previous expansions. At least that is the feeling I have, even playing as a healer with a much less powerful interrupt and fewer ways to sneak.
Like, I'm not saying trash packs should either be like you would just roll over them, but I don't think it should be a case where it's like a very high likelihood that if you miss one thing, it's a wipe.
In crowd control abilities inside trash packs, I still feel it myself. The amount of things that can be quite annoying, and also the amount of things that you don't have a way to address, especially in pugs. You run out of answers, essentially. You run out of ways to deal with certain annoying things because you just use them all, and those mobs are still casting. Those mobs are still moving, those mobs are still doing things you don't want them to do, but you simply have no more ways to stop them from doing so. That seems to be the main thing I noticed when trying to do Mythic Plus this season. Yes, on the plus side, we have been getting more and more nerfs over time. That's true. We have been getting the, several set of nerfs, not just to trash mobs that we have been mentioning, but also to bosses. Still though, all of them, both the trash and the bosses, have been nerfed significantly, so things have been made not nearly as bad. However, what we have been nerfing is the numbers. So all of those abilities, all of those extra mechanics and things to keep track of are still there. All of that bloat, all of that extra is still there. It's just that the numbers now are a little bit smaller, but it's not changing the problem with the developing, essentially the mentality of how those trash mobs have been developed for these dungeons. So overall, I feel like the TLDR is that we have gotten a little bit overboard in developing these new season's dungeons when it comes to mechanics, when it comes to abilities, with threats, with things to keep track of and to essentially be aware of in a Mythic Plus key.
Yeah, just him talking about it, like I didn't realize it was to that degree because I haven't really done higher mythics. So to me, I'm just like, man, that's doesn't even look that fun, to be perfectly honest with you.
If we tone it down a little bit, if we still keep some very dangerous abilities but not split them into 3 every time, it would be better for the average enjoyment of a Mythic Plus key, for the average player. Let me guys know what you think about this topic of Mythic Plus so far in this season, after a month or so of the expansion being open for Mythic Plus. In the meantime, we can leave each other on this Thursday. I am going to leave first by thanking, as usual, my Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to grow myself and this channel. You can still, however, don't forget, you can still support in other ways, which don't include having to spend money, like liking and commenting down below.
He definitely puts in a lot of work when it comes to like investigating the meta
on this video, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. For further ways to support, you can follow me on Twitter. That would help as well. You can find on Twitter communicate.
So with this, like overall, yeah, I mean, I've heard Asmon talk about it as well. So I think there is definitely like a conversation to be had where I think maybe Blizzard can do another sit down and kind of explain what their goals are for Mythic and see if there's a reason why the packs are so annoying to deal with. Because it's not fun, it's just annoying. That's the problem. Is they're purposely annoying. I don't know. I feel like it's a bad design at this point, but it could be wrong. Who knows? I really want to see if they have numbers between Mythic 0 and Mythic 15 because that will determine whether the mechanics are like keeping players interested or if they're making players like turn away. Like obviously you will see some drop off just because it's harder content, but it shouldn't be like to such a ridiculous degree. Like I believe what it is. If I had to guess, you're probably looking at maybe less than 10% of the players who do Mythic 1 to 5 doing Mythic 15 plus, like progressing to that point. Just ballparking it, no information whatsoever, so take it with like a bucket of salt, basically. So, but yeah, pretty solid video though.